That one now introduces us to something else we call rural to urban migration that affects most of the people, right? And therefore, what I want going. Hello, my viewer, and thank you once again for joining us. This is TCL Media. My name, as always, Daniel Lovi. I'm joined today with I will call him our dad, our mentor, and we also have Kevin on the other side, and we are still reaching out because this is mental health day, or rather in this segment we are going to talk about how migration from the rural place to the urban place has in one way or the other affected our mental health. So you can take us through.
Okay, so I don't know what you want to hear about. What do you want to know about? You want to know how the effects?
Yeah, the effects and
rural urban.
Because it has contributed to much of most young people tend to believe that in the urban areas that's where we get chums or we get money. And mtu anatoka ushago, then akienda Nairobi within 2 or 3 months akienda home tunamwona akona iPhone. So when the guys are there chatting, hey bro, how did you manage? Just come to Nairobi, just come to Dorich, just come to Kisumu, you know, the urban areas, and then that's where chums are. And kumbe mtu anafikiria kwamba akitoka ataenda kusaidika. Then it becomes a vice versa. It becomes a city now of hell.
Okay. How to deal with this is how I would look at it. Rural urban migration is one of the effects of mental health, depression, and stigma. Because what happens is that you will find that, for instance, I'll give you a very good example. The first generational Nairobians or urban town dwellers was in the 50s, 60s. That's the first generation that came into. Everyone else was born in a village. In the 50s, 60s, 40s, 30s, there were no towns. All the towns were just the town centers in the village settings. So come just pre-independence, that's in the 50s to the 60s, that's when opportunities came for people to get jobs through the whites who are leaving the country and employing the blacks. So there was a full dominated white society that was working in the towns, and now the blacks started coming in. So in the early 50, mid 50, early 60s, that's when the transition came. And a lot of our parents then moved from the village, having acquired some education, and were able to come and work in Nairobi. So you will find that at that time, up to around the 70s, from Uhuru Highway, this side was predominantly European area. That's why you find even places up to the 60s and early 70s, places like Norfolk was only for the whites. And these who have signs there written, whites and dogs, blacks and dogs not allowed. Can you imagine? That's how it was. We're talking about late 60s going to the 70s. For us who grew up in the colonial, post-colonial, immediate post-colonial days, even in our classes, you could go to a class, you find, like when I went to class 4 in one of the international schools then, and which was purely a white school, we were a class of 26. We never used to have 40. Now when I see classes of 40 children. We were classes of 26. In that class of 26, you could find only 10 blacks and 16 colored people from whites, Indians, and all that. So there used to be discrimination. They used to call us Mutus. I'm sure you wonder what is Mutu. We used to wonder that because every time you were seen somewhere running around the pitch, you hear the white boys shouting and said, "There's a Mutu passing there." So we used to wonder what is Mutu until one time we confronted them and asked them, why do you call us Mutus? So this white boy who was very grateful told us, you know, you look like the black man who works in our village, who works in our farm, because we look like they're black people who work in their farms. And the father, being colonial, the Wazungus used to call the blacks Mutu. Nitiele Mutu, wewe Mutu kuja hapa. So that's how they used to call us Mutus. So we adopted the name Mutus in the 70s as the black people. Was a name that the white kids used to call us, the Mutus. So when the Mutu society moved, and all of a sudden in the mid 70s, late 70s, schools started transforming into full blacks. A lot of blacks came started going from public schools to private schools, because the private schools at that time, up to end of 70s, was only St. Mary's, Banda School, Hillcrest, and then the outside schools, Rift Valley Academy and all that. So we didn't have a lot of international schools. So most people were in public schools. And public schools had 3 grades. There was A grade, B grade, and C grade. Like there's a school in Karen, which is called Karen C. Karen was C, which was C. So the C schools was Karen, Kilimani, Lavington Primary, St. George's. Those were the C schools. B schools were the schools where it had Indians, which was like Ngara Primary, South Sea Primary. Then there was the A schools. A schools were like Langata West, Langata Road. Those were the A schools for the Africans. So there was all that discrimination up to around end of 70s, going 80s. Now, then all of a sudden the migration started coming in. In the 80s, a lot of us, of course, who ended up in our high school days, we were taken to rural schools by our parents because maybe the town was too hot for you. You're not doing it very well here. So most of us schooled in our rural homes from 1 to Form 4, and then maybe from 5 and 6. So a lot of us, when we got there, we found the society there was very remote. You go to a place, and because you have to fit, you find it's very hard to fit. So those guys who we schooled with, later when they joined campus in Nairobi, and they were able to get jobs in Nairobi, they end up staying totally in the urban setup. Today, they have brought up their families in Nairobi and they live in Nairobi. So what happens with that kind of setup is that what they saw us doing, they let their children do, which sometimes it may not be the right thing. And that's why you find a lot of children nowadays, they are not controlled by their parents. Because if you listen to a parent of our age, you hear a child doing something, he says, "Wacha no, you know what was squeeze." So anytime you do not control that child, the moment you bring discipline to that child, or the world starts disciplining him, he gets into depression. So very young children get very depressed at a very early ages because of small things. He wants to go to school with a new pen. You can't buy him a new pen. He gets depressed. So the depression in the children are starting as early as in primary school. Why? Because there's that thing that we think our children should have, yet it's not a must-have. But because of peer pressures we were talking earlier, the peer pressure thing makes the children have to demand these things. And that's why you go in nowadays, you find even the lower generation from us, who are in the 30s and 40s, you find them in supermarkets. You're in a trolley, you're moving your things, the child has picked a toy. Our time you couldn't pick a toy unless you're told, pick that one. Nowadays, a child picks a toy and comes to the counter and starts throwing tantrums on the counter, saying, "No, mommy, I want to buy this, buy me a sweet." And you find most of the counters in these supermarkets, they are chaotic sometimes in shopping days because these children have just gone haywire. And all the mother is doing is, "Baby, boy, don't do that. You know, it's not good." And for me, when I look at that, I always tell them, slap this child, man. Because that's how I was brought up. You are slapped, you run back where the car is and wait for the car to be open for you to enter. Because that's how we were brought up. So that indiscipline has brought a lot of stress in these children. Because then they demand more than what you can give them. And sometimes what they are demanding is because of pressure. So like one thing I remember when we were growing up, we were allowed to open, the TV used to come only at 5. At around this time, 4:30 is when you hear dee, when you open the TV, you know the station is about to open. It was a KBC, VOK station. Around this time, 5 is when, 4:30 is you're hearing music, and then it has all these rainbow colors on the screen. There's nothing, there's no TV during the day. There was no TV station. There was only one radio station. There was no other FM station. FM stations came in the 90s. So there were no FM stations, there were no TV stations, Active Variety, there was no DSTV, there was nothing. So the only time you could watch TV is at 4:30, you open early. You hear it doing ding, then after that it starts, then National Anthem starts at 4:45, then at 5 it starts now, then you know now TV, now kids are running, they're showering, come and watch TV. TV used to close at 11 with the last program, which used to be Little House in the Prairie or some feature. And we knew in our heads that if you watch news, if you watch at 5 o'clock, it's cartoon. 6, there was something called Mamboleo. It was called Mamboleo. Mamboleo is about now what you see features about, talking about policy, government, all these features you see on Kate. Yeah, that was used to go Mamboleo on 6 to 7. 7, then the news comes. After the news comes, at 7:38, wrestling starts. And we knew all our parents were crazy with wrestling because it was a new thing that they were watching. Our parents were also getting excited about TV like we were getting. So you find all parents at 8 o'clock at home watching wrestling because that was the only other program.
So the kind of news that you were receiving at that time, was it just directly from the government? Or
It was VOK. It was VOK.
Okay.
And all the news used to start with Rais Daniel Arap Moi. Leo alisema. It was his news. And then the other news.
Like what he...
It was about the president. It was about the president. I can give you like one very good example. In 1978, I was in class 7, I remember. And it was during the August holidays. We had just come from initiation. We were having 3 initiations happening around August. So we just done an initiation. So we at home. I remember it was August 22nd. With your lesson there, sitting around your homestead at the back, just listening to maybe a radio or something. Then all of a sudden, there was a silence in the news. And the silence in the news, we had the national anthem. And my mother was in shock because according to how they were brought up in the colonial days, a national anthem during the day was something very serious. And all of a sudden, what do we hear? This is to announce that Mzee Jomo Kenyatta has died. And we thought the country has come, because the way my mother and my aunties looked is like the country has come to an end. For that week, people were talking in whispers.
Because the guy...
You know, Kenyatta was everything.
Yeah, it was top of the day.
I mean, if you couldn't just speak about Kenyatta, you have to talk about Ruto. We couldn't. We have to address him as Mzee Jomo Kenyatta in full. Because if you had just saying Jomo or Kenyatta, you could be arrested.
Wow.
It was that tense in this country. People used to whisper about some things. And a month before, 2 months before, 3 months before, the Attorney General then, Charles Jonjo, he said anyone who even can imagine that Kenyatta can die is treason. So even the thought of just imagining, let alone saying Kenyatta looks like he's sick. I had a cousin of mine who was staying with us. He was older than me. He was in Form 6 in Alliance. And I told him, why can't you do this? Have you ever seen how cool looks? The guy said, hey man, no, we're told not to leave. I said, no, let's go out and see how cool looks, man. So we sneaked out of home, went to Utiende shopping center to see how guys look when there's a coup. Because you want to be the one who has the story.
Yeah.
You want to be the witness.
Yeah.
So I was there, I remember. All of a sudden we just met with army guys wearing those clothes from the barracks. And they were marching some Air Force guys from the forest, because we used to live right behind the forest. Marching the Air Force guys, stuck naked with their clothes tied on them, and they're being taken now to trucks. So all of a sudden they saw us and they asked, what are you guys walking around doing? We said we've been sent to the shops. I remember I was young, but my cousin who was older than me and he had some beers was slapped, one slap. The next thing he found himself in the house. So I'm looking for him in the shops. He's not there because we have been locked into the shops. He's run until home. He's gone and said, hey, I've just left the cops in the town and I don't know what happened to Joe. So there was a lot of panic at home that what has Joe done? Why does he have to get involved in these things? Why did he have to go out? So all of a sudden I came home and I remember I was in trouble because I was told not to leave because of the coup. So the coup went on, I remember, we were in the house for almost a few weeks, that we were coming out just beat. The coup started 6 o'clock, curfew, from there 9 o'clock to midnight curfew, like that. So at midnight you hear everyone now driving back home. I remember we used to go out to discos, and the disco around 8:30, the discos closed so that you can get home by 9.
So the curfew began a long time ago?
Yeah, curfew was there in 92 coup. We had I remember, the curfew was serious. So that's what I'm trying to say. So with all that happening, in 2000 then there was an urban migration, where a lot of people came from the rural area now to Nairobi. Now that rural urban migration started from places like Umoja. The estates of Umoja were in 90s, 2000. So many people started from Umoja, moved to Komarok, moved to Kayole, from Kayole. A lot of them now, because of opportunities within government, good or weird opportunities, they end up coming on across this side. And many live in these high-end places. In 2000 also places like Kitengela grew up, places like Syokimau started growing up. So people started now building their houses and living out of town, out of those areas. But unfortunately, there's one thing I always tell people. Civilization is not an event. Even if today you got 20 million shillings, it does not change you to be civilized. You've only gotten money. So that event does not make you civilized. And so that's why you find a lot of issues that we have is that a lot of so-called elite are very uncivilized.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they're very
They're
uncivilized.
people with money, but
They're with
no
money, but
culture.
without not cultured.
And not
And that's the
cultured,
problem
yeah.
we're having, is that we are having a society that has a lot of money, but very uncultured, because they have looked at money as an income and riches as an event, not as a process. And so without that process, there's a lot of etiquette that is not there. So there are things they are allowing their children to do that they would not have done. In our time, maybe this whole thing of LGBTG would never have happened, because our parents were very conscious about us. Today, the children have turned the parents upside down, and now the parents have to listen to the children, because they always fear this child could do this, could commit suicide, and there's a lot of threats of that. Where someone tells the mother, I'll commit suicide, I'll shoot myself, and the older mom is saying, boy, please don't do that, but boy, don't do that. In our time, you were just thrown for the rope, and you're told, go and hang yourself, we'll bury you. And you couldn't do it. I mean, really.
Just
Just go and take the rope and go and bang. And if you don't kill yourself today, we'll beat you. So you have an option.
It's either
die or being shot or being beaten.
Either way, it's not good.
It's not going to be a good story. You can't bring up that story again. Don't bring frustrations here. And that's what they used to stop us with. But nowadays it's become a soft society. And that soft society has also created up to things, even into marriage. That you're finding people are marrying people they have met in Nairobi. You come to Nairobi, you're living in Umoja, you go to Umoja a church in Umoja, you see a girl who's come from another place, you marry. After 3 months, you realize your culture and her culture don't work, you have a child involved, there are broken families. Now those broken families bring a lot of stress on the children who are staying on single parents, and those single parent children feel they are not wanted, and there's all that chaos. So within all that chaos of broken families, rural urban migration, etiquette, lack of civilization,